Last birthday, my daughter sent me a card. Its caption read, "If at first you don't succeed, then try doing it as Mum told you to in the first place." Well, perhaps there's other ways we could end that sentence. But one of life's greatest challenges is how we react when, at first, we don't succeed. In today's readings we see some example of this. In the book of Acts we hear of a situation where things have gone wrong and there are life and death decisions to be made. Peter and Judas take different options. Judas was part of the inner circle, one of the 12. We're told he was numbered among us and allotted his share in the ministry. And then you can hear something of the shock and horror in Peter's voice when he recounts that Judas became a guide to those who arrested Jesus. Judas's failure was certainly spectacular, and in general he gets a poor press. He's a thief, he is evil, the devil has entered him. However, let's not forget that Judas wasn't the only one who didn't at first succeed. When Jesus asked his followers to pray with him in the Garden of Gethsemane, they all fall asleep. When the police snatch squad arrives to arrest Jesus, all the disciples do a runner. Peter, it is true, is brave enough to follow at a distance into the high priest's house where Jesus is to be interrogated. He warms himself by the courtyard fire, trying to look inconspicuous. However, as soon as he is accused of being with Jesus, he fervently denies ever knowing him. "Me? Follow Jesus? You must be kidding. Don't know him. Never met him." He does this not once but 3 times. So they all were a bit of a failure. The difference between Judas and Peter is not that one was faithful and the other was not. No. The difference between them is the decision they make after they have failed. If at first you don't succeed, then what? After his monumental denial of Jesus, Peter still hopes for forgiveness. He knows he's failed, but he doesn't despair. He hangs on in there. Later, at the lakeside, the risen Jesus challenges Peter 3 times. "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And then he is given back his ministry. Jesus says, "Feed my sheep." After his failure, Peter still turns back to Christ, asks for forgiveness, and is restored as the chief pastor of the church. Judas doesn't. Judas, at first you don't succeed, despairs. He thinks he is beyond restoration. He decides that he has no future and kills himself. Perhaps if Judas had hung around rather than hung himself, then the story may have had a different ending. Who knows, perhaps we'd had a story of Judas being restored to his ministry. But Judas doesn't, and now others must choose his replacement. If all the followers of Jesus failed him, then in a sense all of them must be involved in the decision of what to do next. Peter gathers the believers together in Jerusalem. We read in the previous chapter that this included the Lord's mother, various women disciples, as well as the 11 apostles that are left. there are about 120 all told, which, although not a massive number, would still need a fairly substantial home to squeeze them all in. We suspect it may have been the house of John Mark in Jerusalem, but we don't know for sure. They haven't succeeded. But now, what do they decide? They decide to recommit themselves to the Lord's service, which means that Judas must be replaced to keep the number at 12, the number of the tribes of Israel. What's really interesting, though, is that Peter only lays down 2 conditions about who is eligible to be an apostle. They must be someone who has been with them for the whole of Jesus' ministry. That's from the time John was baptizing until Jesus was taken away from them. And secondly, it must be someone who can witness to the resurrection, who's seen the risen Lord. So 2 candidates who fulfill these conditions are put forward: Joseph, Barsabbas, who bears the Latin name also Judas, and Matthias. Having narrowed the choice down to 2, they leave the final decision to God. So here they pray, "Lord, show us which of these 2 you have chosen to take over this ministry." Matthias is picked. This is an example of what Jesus promises his church in today's gospel. When we face failures or difficulties, we are not called to retreat into our shells in fear or despair. Back there in the upper room, Jesus is warning his disciples that he will be leaving them, that he faces apparent failure, crucifixion, and death. While he was with his followers, he could guide and teach them. Soon he will no longer be physically with them. His parting gift is not a book of instructions to cover every eventuality, nor does he give them a set of rules to guide them in all future decisions. Instead, he gives them a promise. They will have the Spirit of truth. Jesus doesn't ask the Father to remove them from the world with its problems and difficulties, but he prays they may have the courage to go forward with his protection. May they be protected from the evil one and be consecrated in the truth. As a church, there will be many times when we at first don't succeed. Then, like those early Christians in Acts, we must start again. Like the other church, we need to do that together as a community, making important decisions together as one. Peter narrows that decision down for them to 2 choices and then prays. We, like the early church too, may narrow the choices down, but we should pray to God for guidance in making our final decisions. We can do all this with confidence because of those promises Jesus gives us. If at first we don't succeed, we don't need to despair or give up, for we can trust that Christ will protect us and will guide us into all truth. Amen.